Hello, my name is Nakatris Perkins, and I am a senior strategist at Ubuntu Research and Evaluation. I am here to give you some information about active equity and how you can embrace conflict through language. Ubuntu is a research and evaluation, is a professional learning community run by Black women who use liberation, beloved community frameworks to evaluate, facilitate, and strategize with individuals, organizations, and communities. Over this past year, we've been able to facilitate and strategize with multiple communities and individuals in a multitude of cities. So we went to Seattle, we went to Madison, and we also went to Chicago and had the wonderful opportunity to work with many people there and talking about what it looks like to stop hate. Stop Hate Project is one of our partners, and they seek to strengthen the capacity of community leaders, law enforcement organizations around the country to combat hate by connecting these groups with established legal and social services resources. So what we were able to do over this time is provide, again, a number of workshops. And then what we were able to do just a few weeks back is provide a webinar for public allies who in their national office are able to serve a multitude of cities. And so we talked to them about what it looks like to use language as our day-to-day activism, what it looks like for us to really change the way we speak, interrupt people and ideas while calling them in. So calling people in while calling their language out. So what we are doing now is offering some of those tidbits to you. That webinar was very rich, and we wanted to make sure that it was a resource that everyone could use that comes in contact with Stop Hate. So if you're watching this, it's because you were able to get the webinar from our work with Public Allies and from our partnership with Stop Hate Project. So there's a bit of an intro, there are some pieces in the middle and the end that really bring us back to this space and hopefully connect all the dots for you. Not your typical webinar, but hopefully something that you can really use. Regardless that you're not live with us, we do ask that you do join us in social media. If you go to Ubuntu Research on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, it will be great to hear from you and interact with you there. Feel free to ask questions in that space. We will answer you in a very public way or a private way if that makes more sense for you, but really want to connect with you. If you have a question, you also can email us at learn@ubunturesearch.com. But yeah, shout us out, send us a hashtag, ask a question, give us some pushback. We welcome all of that, and we'll really love to hear from you based on this being a resource that might have been helpful to you. So as I said, we did some workshops earlier in the year in some cities, and one of the largest frameworks we talked about in those two-day workshops was beloved community. Beloved community, we think, based on our research and as well as based on an amazing article that is a conversation between Bell Hooks and George Brosey, we were able to come out with about 9 practices that we really talk about how you integrate that into your day-to-day work, your day-to-day life, and really change from moving to a place where we are individualized and keeping our eyes on what it looks like to be better human beings, but instead how do we build communities where we're better human beings? There are things that I do that are not helpful to everyone around me, and so how do I change that in practice with other people who are interested in doing the same thing? One of those ideas or practices is embracing conflict. Oftentimes in spaces, there's a lot of pushback to embracing the conflict, right? We cut people off, we try to figure out how to pack the conflict up nicely, we sweep conflict under the rug, we shush conflict, but the reality is we cannot build communities if we're not able to embrace it. And we don't mean just like acknowledge it and keep moving, but we need to embrace it in a way that I might disagree with you in a very, very large way, and I still have love and respect for you. I want to work with you. I want you to feel safe and valued here, and I want to feel safe and valued here. And one of the ways we can embrace conflict is simply by thinking about the language we use. Words have power, immense power. Maya Angelou even offers us that words are things. So when we talk about language, we're talking about what it means to own our words and what it means to push back when there are words that we feel like marginalize other people. So words stick to us, right? Words stick to thighs like cornbread, in my own personal opinion and example. So how can we interrupt some of this language? We want to be very clear that as powerful as words are, right? We've definitely gotten over the adage that sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never hurt us. That's just not true. Words hurt, they marginalize, they're divisive. And so how can we call people in by calling their language out? And How can we be very clear in spaces where it's not always welcomed, right? So whether there's language you hear in elevators, in the lunchroom, at the water cooler, in a board meeting, at a presentation, I can be facilitating a whole workshop. And if I'm facilitating a workshop on behalf of your organization and I use words that do not feel good to you and don't make you feel safe and valued in the space, you should be able to raise your hand and say something. And so today we're going to talk about how you can do that. One of the things we do offer in that space is there is a beautiful video by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And so though we're not able to show it to you, we do want to make sure that you're able to see it. So you'll just hear about it a little bit later in our webinar. Before we move any further, we want to make sure that we use Stop Hate's definition of hate speech. So hate speech is a common term attached to expressions that are extremely offensive or that directly call out and oppose a belief, conduct, or identity of others. The reason that that's important to even tell you about in terms of hate speech is that often we use hate speech as this very extreme. You know, we're thinking about people marching and screaming at each other and facial expression. But oftentimes hate speech is really casual. Hate speech comes out with, you know, I'm not doing that. That's so retarded. But that's extremely offensive. It opposes beliefs, conduct, and identity of others. And so how do you call a person out when they say something like retarded or crazy or ghetto or gypped? How do you say something when it's like, we got raped in that last case? You didn't get raped in a case, right? Sexual violence and sexual assault is an act that is egregious, but we as people use some of these words that are so hurtful and try to downplay them a little bit and make them, you know, more palatable. And we're saying that that's not okay. That's not how we need to embrace that conflict, and that's not how we will be able to create beloved community. Think about white people using the word in the song. And he goes into an explanation about words just don't belong to everybody. There is movement around the reclamation of words, and that's cool. Also, we all can't use the words that might be reclaimed. There's words that might be reclaimed by me that I can't use. That others can't use, excuse me. So he talks about how there are some women who use the B word among their friends. He talks about in the homosexual community, people who use the F word, and how that is different than us using the word as weapons, and that word can be used as weapons, and that we all don't get to sit and say, that's not, we're going to take the power away from that word by using it more frequently among ourselves in mixed company, in diverse groups, because that's just not true. They don't belong to everybody. So if you have a chance, I would really hope you watch the video. We usually show it as an introduction to get people hearing some of those words because we want you to be comfortable saying them. We want you to say them out loud. We actually are about to invite you to say it out loud right now. As promised, this isn't a webinar where we spend a whole bunch of time talking to you through a video screen, but also want you to spend some time talking to each other. Again, we don't have a lot of time, but what we're about to do right now is break up into breakout rooms. You don't have to do anything. You will appear in a room with a smaller group of people where you will be unmuted. And what we're asking you to do is just take a moment and think about and share. Think about and share words that you have heard, that you have said, that have hurt others. To add some perspective to what it looks like to think about our collective liberation, our voice, and some experience that's important as we think about how we stop marginalizing different people. So what you're going to do is go into the room. You're going to literally offer words that you never want to hear again, phrases you never want to hear again. You're going to offer maybe a story. You're only going to have 7 minutes to do this. And as we transition, it might feel more like 5, I'm very honest with you, but we're going to send you also some time inside of your chat to be able to know the time. So as you're in the room, you have 4 more minutes left. You have 5 more minutes left so that you know that your time is clicking down. So right now, Javier is going to break you into groups, and you will appear in a room answering the question, what are words or phrases you would like to not hear again as you create a beloved community and you call people in and call language out in the places that we live and work. So just in short, words simply don't belong to everyone. And in doing that, in knowing that, it's important that we figure out what words those are. So this video definitely pointed some out, but we took some time in our webinar to have people point out their own. And so at this moment, if you want to just take just a second and just think about words you never want to hear again, words that have been offensive to you in the workplace, words that, phrases in spaces that just weren't, they didn't make you feel like people saw you. They didn't make you feel like people were valuing your time in that space. Another thing is that sometimes it's not a direct offense, right? It might be an offense to an entire population you have no direct contact with, but you know it's an offensive word. It could be your child, daughter, friend, mother, cousin, a community that you do have a very close connection with. So it's not always about the word belonging to you, but when you know it doesn't belong or it may not belong, right? Because we do make assumptions that it may not belong to the person that's using it. How do you call them in while calling their language out? Again, it's very important to call them in, because interrupting language is not about saying like you're wrong and you shouldn't have said that. It's about trying to understand where a person has come from. Again, embracing conflict. I may not be right in what I feel like you shouldn't be saying. I could be completely misled. But if I feel offended or feel somebody else could be offended in this space, it makes sense for me to say something, to say stop, to ask some questions. And so think about a word that you would really prefer not to hear anymore, and just hold on to that. We're going to give you some things that might be helpful to you in calling those words out. Cool. So what we're going to do now, I'm really glad that the reason we have people really think of words is because in thinking about how to interrupt language, we don't want you to be thinking about it in a hypothetical manner, but instead to really think about things that you hear all the time or things that you really would like to do differently. Some things I got to hear, luckily, someone was able to actually be stuck in the center with me, so I got to hear some things. Something that really stood out was that sometimes we're talking about coded language as well. Coded language, when you know somebody means something else, and being able to ask, what do you really mean about that? So what I'm going to do, or mean by that, what I'm going to do right now is just give you a few tools to think about. Well, these are good words, good phrases, things to think about as you call something like that out. First, you'll notice that the check yourself, which is the first step, is framed by 4 things. These are the 4 agreements that Don Miguel Ruiz offers to us through his book. That's something that you should definitely read if you haven't. We'll share some resources at the end, because it allows us to take a look in ourselves when we're moving throughout the world. So in hearing some of these things, to not take it personally, which is sometimes hard, to always do our best in that moment, right? So sometimes I do offer that an interrupting word. Sometimes it's just not the day. You haven't had enough water, you haven't eaten, you didn't get enough sleep, and you are not in a place to interrupt. But there is a time where you can go back later and still bring that back up because you were present, but not feeling like if you can't do your best in that moment, that's not necessarily the time to do it. To not make assumptions. Again, we're separating a person from their language. So to not make assumptions about who that person must be by what they said, and to be impeccable with your own words. So think about what you're saying and to make sure that it's coming from a place of information and it's genuine, and what you say is really what you mean. So the first step in interrupting is to check yourself. There's just 3 subcategories. One is that in calling some language out, you're calling out language, it's not about you. If someone says something, so I saw gypped on here, right? Like, oh man, I got gypped at the store, or the government is gypping us, or there's so many ways that people use gypped in casual conversations. When I'm calling that out, it's not about me. I could have felt taken aback by it, but it's not me interrupting it. Is not about myself. So it can't be about me when I talk to them. It has to be about the other person. I'm helping someone else unlearn something, because unlearning is for everyone, right? Like every one of us have language, and have bias, and have misinformation that we didn't learn, 1, on accident, but 2, voluntarily. And so unlearning is for everyone. It's not about me, and I know that something can be unlearned, so I need to make this about the other person. The third thing is also that our liberation is inseparable. There's no way for us to really be in a space of beloved community, to really be in a space of liberation, if everyone's not involved. So I know there's some times where, for me, I'm in places where I'm like, you know what, I could probably build a beloved community without this specific person, because their language is always so marginalizing, or because they always do things that they were not aware of their privilege. But the reality is I do need them in my community for a multitude of reasons. So we have to think about how our liberation is inseparable. The second thing that you're going to do is ask yourself, And again, this is still framed by the same 4 agreements, but in asking yourself, it is remembering that what apprehension do I have, if any, like what is stopping me from saying something? Butterflies, the lump in your throat, what is pausing me? Also, what do I hope to get out of this? And can I offer dignity this person deserves? Those last 2, we want the answer for what do I hope to get out of this is I hope to get closer to a beloved community. I hope to practice what it means to call people in while I call language out. And can I offer dignity this person deserves? We want the answer to be yes, right? Dignity is reciprocal. I need to offer it. You are worthy because I am worthy, because she is worthy, because they are worthy, because he is worthy. And before you move forward, remember that this person has merit and they deserve to be talked to, spoken to, acknowledged. They're not invisible, even if what they're saying makes other people feel the opposite. And so again, separating the person from the language, and you're calling the person in while you're calling their language out. So asking yourself those 3 questions, and then you're gonna go, right? So you're good, I ate, I drank water, I'm hydrated. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm really gonna say something that allows me to have a further conversation. And calling somebody out, in most cases, so 3 out of the 4 I'm gonna offer, in most cases, you are trying to have a dialogue with somebody in order to go back and forth, to understand where they're coming from, and also to help them understand a perspective that they might not have been aware of. There also is a place where you might not be able to do that, so you're just declaring it intolerable. So I'm going to go through them. The first one is to summarize and repeat. If you heard somebody say, there is, all Muslims are terrorists, it's something that was just shared, right? So I heard you say all Muslims are terrorists, and because I'm summarizing by saying exactly what you just said, right? In this sentence, and I was here, I heard you say all Muslims are terrorists. Can you, is that what you meant to say, or can you give me more information about how you got to that point? And leaving it at that and giving that person something to share. In summarizing and repeating that, you do need to ask an open-ended question. So is that something is that what you meant to say, and can you give me more information, right? By saying, is that what you meant to say? And they're like, yep, that is. Now we're like, oh, okay, well, that was rude, right? So there's a pause there, and then you have to keep building up more questions. So to summarize exactly what you said, there's a lot of coded language that people were talking about. And so I know the one that I've heard earlier was like talking about working I live in an urban environment, I work in an urban school district. I'm really trying to figure out how to better connect with an urban platform or urban spaces. And so in that conversation, somebody might say urban 15 times in a paragraph and they're at the end of a conversation. And so being able to summarize, so what I heard you say is you are trying to get better connected with an urban community. Can you please tell me what you mean by the word urban when you say that in the space? And so it's important to ask that question. The second one is to invite to dialogue. And that really is a time where you put the onus on what you're trying to learn more about on you. Again, it's about them, but you want to put it on you, so you're inviting them. I've really been wanting to talk more about that. I've been wanting to know more about why people use urban when they mean Black, Latinx, poor. I've really wanted to know more about that. Do you mind, talking about it? Can we talk about that more? I want to get on the same page with you. I value you as a person. I want to understand your opinion from that. This also is important too, when you think about how you are helping someone find their leadership, build their leadership, empowering them to speak truth to power. Because if you can't ask them more to ask them to dialogue with you around it, you're putting them in a space where they won't be able to do it with anyone else. And as a person who is developing that, if somebody calls you out, then you need to be in a place to model what it looks like to be called out, right? So like that's kind of specifically thinking about if we're working with young people, if we're working with allies, and you're in a space where somebody calls your language out, that is an amazing opportunity. It might not feel like it because, again, somebody calls your language out, but it's an amazing opportunity to be able to dialogue with somebody and help them understand why what you said, or that what I said was offensive and marginalizing. And you know what? Hearing your perspective is not something I'll say again. There is a way to build leadership in that space. The third way is to offer statistics, facts, or a personal story. A lot of us have things built up in us and we know information about a whole lot of topics. So if someone was to talk to me about, so something I hear young people say all the time is no homo before they do almost anything. I thought at some point it would die, but it still has not. So it is still something that I hear a lot in hallways sometimes in some of the schools that we work in. And in saying that, I'll ask them, like, you know what, I from my experience, there's never been a time where whatever the action is has been connected to homosexuality. So you giving a high five or you being like, I like your shoe, no homo, I like your shoes, I've never seen it be connected. So why do you connect it? And asking again an open-ended question. I've never seen it connected. Why do you connect those two things? Again, having a discussion. The only one that does not lend itself to have a discussion is when you declare intolerable or unacceptable. This one is not one that you're doing because you don't want to call the person in. It's more because there might not be time or space to do so. But I do recommend that you follow up. So if you are leading a workshop and somebody says that, it might be offering, like, you know, somebody says, oh, well, I just can't stand working in the ghetto, and you're leading a workshop, or you're in a space where people are talking about that, right? And everybody's like, yeah, I don't feel safe in the ghetto. Saying out loud, you know what, in this space, offering even to mix the two together, right? Like, this is what a ghetto is. We all know where it came from. In Germany, and there were Jewish people who were put in spaces limited to poverty, and those were called ghettos, and that's where it came from. That has actually nothing to do with what we're talking about today. Additionally, over time, it has really been pointed to people of color in the United States of America. If I was to interrupt it, you know, we're not going to use ghetto. Every time I hear ghetto, what people are actually trying to say, they're trying to say Black women who have poor, what they have English standards, who are living in poverty. And so you call that ghetto when you don't know anything about them and you don't know their life story. So I don't know why you don't feel safe in that space, but let's dig into that in this presentation, and let's not use the word ghetto. It's not going to be a word we use while we're here today. That might be something that I can follow up on after the seminar. In my experience, also places where people follow up with you, like, when you said that, it made me think more about how I use the word. And so how can we keep talking about it, or how do we keep offering information about it? So sometimes you do need to declare it intolerable and unacceptable, because you can't dig into that and have a one-on-one conversation because you're in a group setting. And that's usually when I would declare something intolerable or unacceptable. If I'm one-on-one or in a small group, I would suggest one of the first three, because you have an opportunity. Again, the goal is to call somebody in and to make them feel a part of your beloved community. So those are the four tools that you can use. And I also want to just be clear that this is hard work. It's hard to do that. Every time I do the presentation, I rattle them off, do a few examples. It's really super easy, but it is really hard work, and it doesn't stop. So I want to give you an example of how sometimes it even comes in writing. So as we were planning this session, during some point when we were talking about, like, figuring out how to make sure people knew about it, the song Walk It Like You Talk It came to mind. And we were like, that's exactly what we're doing. We're going to help people walk the walk that they're talking when it comes to language. So we're going to play the song during the webinar. We put out the information. So it's going to be called Active Equity, Walk It Like You Talk It. And what came back to us was, how are you doing a session about equity and you're going to walk something like you talk it? You haven't thought about people who don't walk. Like, how are you doing something about equity and you haven't made it accessible to everybody? Good point, right? Lump in my throat. Like, I can't, yes, you are absolutely correct. Walk it like you talk it is ableist, right? And it came in writing. So it was an email that came right back that was like, hey, you shouldn't be saying that. So it was good to be called out in that. So the email that came to us that we got, it was like immediately yep, you're absolutely correct, and we will change the information, and owning that there are some language that we've used in many spaces that could be considered, that is ableist, not to be considered, that is ableist, and we're working on that individually and as an organization. So in that, let's say we were in person, if you can go to the next slide, it just gives you some information about how you could have talked about that in that space. So if you're gonna summarize and repeat, so it's like, so you're saying a webinar is enacting practices to demonstrate what we say we do or are about, right? And my answer would have been like, exactly. So why, and exactly what we're doing. And you could have offered to me, well, why don't you just say that? Because walk it like you talk it marginalizes an entire group of people. It makes them invisible, like you're not talking to them. So to be able to help break down what somebody means and give them other language for it, or the invite to dialogue, walk it like you talk it. Why did you choose that phrase? Can you tell me more about it? Also, then again, asking for an open-ended question. The reason why you want to ask an open-ended question and walk it like you talk it is a good one, because in this space we really were talking about a song. And so if I would have heard it, if somebody said walk like you talk it right now, there's phrases about walking like you talk, especially in leadership space. Like, we're going to create leadership, you got to walk the talk, right? And so that could have been where somebody went, but we are literally talking about a song. So there also is some spaces where it's like, okay, that's not a good song. These are the reasons why that doesn't make sense to use at all, or as an example of how to interrupt language, but I have a better understanding of where you got it from and how you got to that space. So it does make sense to ask that open-ended question. To offer statistics. I like that song, and it was offered to me that it does not include people that may not walk or may not talk. I get why you used it, but being a workshop to think about language, how can we make it more inclusive? So just this is what's real. The end. In a personal experience that happened too, I've been in a space where maybe there has been somebody who's been in a space where somebody was offended by that, and they can tell that person's story in a way that might still not connect to that person, right? So like, I can tell an anonymous story about somebody who felt offended in that way. I feel like I'm talking fast. I'm gonna try to slow down for you all. I just got a message. So that's another way. And then lastly, just walk it like you talk it excludes an entire population of people. Everybody can't walk. So I get where you're going, but what's another way we can say it? And for this one in particular, it is opening up a dialogue in almost every way when you tell somebody that what's another way we can say it. We meaning I'm willing to think through this with you. And also what you're trying to say makes complete sense to me. And I can understand it. I just think there's probably other words we can use. Because again, we are trying to make sure that we are connecting to the person and only calling out their language. Live it like you give it. See, there's so many other options. I would never have thought about that. Active equity, live it like you give it. Boom. Thank you, Rachel. I will make sure to shout you out when we use that title. Thank you, Candace. I will make sure to shout you out when we use that title in the future. Candace changed this. Another thing another place that's also come up for us is when we're making community constitution, people will say step up and step back instead of make space and take space. So now even if somebody says step up and step back in a workshop that we're doing, we will write that to make space and take space and then explain why we changed the language. So that also is a way where like we declared it unacceptable in our space, but we don't call the language out to that person at all. We're just like, we understand what you're saying. This is a way we can say it, and this is why we want to say it that way, which is another way to declare something unacceptable, the language, but not the person. So we would like to take some time for you to practice. So we are going to bring you back up into rooms. We are going to give you a few minutes just to settle in those rooms, because we know that to come back and forth, we want to give you a full 10 minutes in that room. The goal in the room is to how you would address a comment that came up in your group earlier. So you'll probably have about a minute or so once we think you're settled to use one. Whatever words you think of, whatever phrase came up multiple times, one that you might have seen in the chat box already, one that you would like to interrupt, and how you would go back and interrupt it. Whether you would invite somebody to dialogue, whether you would offer statistics or facts or a personal story, whether you would summarize and repeat. The very key part in interrupting language is that you do the third piece, right? So if I say, I really don't understand why people use the word ghetto so freely around so many different populations. It's very confusing to me, and I've been wanting to talk about it. And the person goes, oh, well, I just meant, I just mean like people who live in a certain place that are all the same. And you're like, oh, okay, that doesn't make sense. And you stop. There's pushback, right? So I'm going to encourage you to do the third comment. What would you say after that person responds to the tool that you use? You invite somebody to dialogue, they respond to you. What is the third thing that you're going to say? How do you respond to the response? So there's people in your room that you can go back and forth with. That's why we broke you up into rooms, and we'll try to really give you a full 10 minutes in there. And so Javier, if you can break people up into rooms, that would be awesome so that people can get a chance to practice.
All right, here we go.
So at this point in the webinar, we were able to have everyone go into breakout rooms, digital breakout rooms at that, right? the same ones where they were able to share comments earlier. What I want you to do is actually, whether you pause us for a second or pause the webinar completely and spend some time, I really want you to practice. This does not work if you don't practice. It is incredibly hard. We don't always do it right, but I promise you it's in the message, not the method. And so we really want you to practice. If there's something that you've heard, how would you interrupt it? In practicing, it's really important that you think about what happens third. So someone says, you know, this project is so retarded. I really just can't do it anymore. I don't understand why it's even framed like this. And we need to start over. Scrap it and let's start from the very beginning. Your response might be, when you say retarded, what are you trying to say? It sounds like you're not happy with how we've gotten to this point for the project and you want to take a few steps back and start over. But in using retarded, I got confused. So what do you mean by that? Their response could be a number of things. It could be as simple as, oh, you know, you're right, which is ideal, right? Oh, you're right. What I really meant was this project, this workshop that we're working on, it just doesn't, you know, it doesn't make sense for me right now, and it's confusing to me. More than likely, they're not going to say, you're right, I shouldn't have used that word. More than likely is, what don't you understand about it? Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's retarded. So then what do you say third? Like, what is the third thing you say? Because responding to the language is what's the hard part. So what don't I understand about retarded? I don't think anything. I really did understand your sentiment, but when I think about people who are consistently referred to as retarded, I also think about how they're marginalized. And I've interacted with people who have been offended by the word. I've been in a lot of schools and spaces that it's just not something that is make people feel good and valued. And I don't know if there's anybody in the room that felt offended by it personally, but I did. And so I really would just really appreciate if you could think of another word. You are confused or you don't like the way we're using it, and I wonder if it's okay if we use that type of language. We hope that in that space they say yes. Whether they're happy about it or not, we hope they say yes. But in times they're going to be like, no, I want to use the word. And I don't think that at work that's the time to push back even more and go, you need to change your language. But what it does do is it gives you, okay, if you feel like that's a word that you have to use, I don't agree and it's offensive to me, but I don't want to argue. Not arguing in a space doesn't mean you're not embracing conflict. In fact, I think that's a conversation that you go ahead and pick up later in time, right? That's a conversation that you go back and have one day, like earlier in the meeting last week, the meeting yesterday. I wouldn't go past a week, but a meeting last week, the meeting yesterday. It was really interesting that you just didn't want to stop using retarded, even though you know it's offensive. Are there any words that you've ever heard at work that offends you? And you're starting a conversation now really to pull some empathy out. What has this person heard that's been offensive? And there might be a ton of words, right? Things that they just thought there was nothing they could do about, and then offering support and helping them interrupt that. Or they say, no, I'm never offended. People are too sensitive. We need to stop being so sensitive about language. And you offer again, like, I get it. There are so many things to try to balance in what we're doing. There are so many words that people are saying, don't use this, but growing up or in our families or in our social settings, we use them all the time. I'm not specifically saying that you should not use that word. I'm telling you that it's offensive and that it hurts people's feelings and it stops them from hearing some of the things you're saying. So you wanted to take 2 steps back on that project. That made complete sense to me. There's some of your message that could have easily gotten lost in that, though, because I was turned off by the fact that you said retarded. That's all I'm trying to share. And I hope that it's something you'll think about. And then you walk away, you end it. So I need you to practice. I hope you pause us to just do that for a second. It's really important that you try, because until you, like anything else, until you practice, it's not something that just turns on when you're inside of a situation. So if you want to pause us for just a second, I think it will really be helpful to just practice for a moment. Welcome back. So I'm hoping that people were able to go through and talk about interrupting a word, either using summarize and repeat, invite to dialogue, offer statistics or facts or a personal experience, or declare intolerable or unacceptable in the space that you're in. What we want to do now is I'm just going to offer some things to remember. And then while I'm doing that, if you have questions that you want us to talk about, if you can put those in the chat box. We really do want to make sure we respect your time. So we only have a couple minutes left. So if you have questions, please go ahead and put those in the chat box. Hopefully I just answered Elise's question about the 4. And so the things to remember is, one, that this can be super uncomfortable, but it's also awesome, right? Like there's a time where you're walking into it and it's like, this is really hard. And there's times when you walk away and you're like, that didn't work. I'm telling you that every single time you did it, it did something. It does work. Because even if somebody doesn't feel like that was a great conversation, or they feel like it doesn't really help them in that space, in most cases, that's a story that they share. Like, you'll never believe what Monique said to me today at work. And that starts a conversation somewhere else where people are able to think about the language they use. So that is awesome. The other thing to remember, that the message is more significant than the method. So if you feel like you mixed all 3 of them together, 4 of them, added an intolerable at the end, the message that you're sending out is that I want you here, but your language doesn't help me do that, or help other people be in this space in a way where they feel safe and valued. So the message is more significant than the method. The other thing is that this is joyful work filled with radical love. And so when we think about joy as something that people can't take from you, when we think about radical, it's just like ground shaking, inseparable, unbreakable, and what it looks like to really be in spaces where we're connected on that level. We might not be able to see that in our lifetime, but as we interrupt language and call people in, we are creating a world where that could be possible. And so that is awesome. Also, to talk about how everyone deserves to be recognized as worthy. So to remember that you're, again, calling in a person while calling out their language. To be open to pushback and unlearning as well, because somebody might offer something to you in this process where you're like, oh, okay, I never thought about it that way either. And you're able to have a really great discussion that allows you to unlearn some things that you might not have thought about. And then lastly, even if you're doing it wrong, it's the right thing to do. So you might not feel like, I didn't use the tools correctly, and so I did it the wrong way, or somebody blew up at you and got super defensive. We can't necessarily control people's reactions or responses. And so to remember that it was good to say something to them and to call them in this space and let them know that their language was offensive. And so again, the 4 things that we're talking about are summarizing and repeat as a tool. Also to offer personal experience or some facts, to go ahead and declare intolerable, if that makes the most sense for you, or to invite to dialogue in a space. So those are the 4 steps. I know that was one of the questions that were there. Is there another question that you think makes sense to answer, Monique?
I know that there's a lot of comments about grants and grant writing, and so I have been sharing in the chat about the use of asset-based language and speaking to a need as opposed to dehumanizing a community or a population to write the grant, but also acknowledging that funders back you into a corner often, and to ask the question in a way that's like, in order to get this money, you need to demonstrate very negative things about a particular population. And so thinking about the both and around both of those. So I know that was a question that came up. I do think another thing about the 4 steps, which you might need to repeat one more time just so that everybody can hear them, is thinking about in some of the systemic ways people are using language, like in the policy, in the directions, in like those larger scopes and ways people interrupt that.
And you said in systemic ways how you interrupt it?
Yes.
So I think that what's important is that in interrupting language, we are in a space where we are breaking down systems. And so there are times where something so simple, or even if it feels hard, as interrupting urban, ghetto, generalizing, so we talk about generalizing whole populations or whole organization, generalizing anything, and being able to really break out that fact there's a whole bunch of individuals involved, that is helping break down a system, right? Because systems are made to put people in pockets, systems are made to marginalize people, systems are made to make sure these people have and these people don't. So the fact that you are calling that out through language does move us to the point where we are able to break down those systems. At the same time, in no way, shape, or form am I saying you need to continue to call out. So if we don't call out, basically we're just saying the systems are okay. That is, a point that maybe we are, silence is a thing, and if we're not always calling things out, how often are you sitting in silence? So also there's going to be times where you don't want to call something out or you don't feel safe to do it, and that doesn't mean that you are supporting a system. And so how can you get into a safer environment, or how can you ask for assistance in interrupting? Also, we're not always going to see immediate change. So if you're calling something out and you're like, calling it out is consistency, that's going to interrupt the systems, and calling it out in the spaces where we do feel safe, in those spaces that we do have consistent access to. So there are also questions.
I'm sorry. I wanted to respond to a question about Beloved Community as a framework and understanding it, and looking for specific resources for it. Your best resource is to reference the article that we shared in every single training, which frames Beloved Community into very specific actions and how it showed up in the community in which Mel Hooks lives in Berea, Kentucky. But how we talk about it is definitely a combination of understanding Dr. Martin Luther King's work around identifying Beloved Community and how that connects to dignity. It is a well-researched topic, and it's definitely something that, in terms of a reading list, is an ongoing work for us. But that link to that article is all the way already available on our social media, particularly on our Facebook, but we can definitely make sure it's included in our resources after this.
If you go to the next slide, it is at least the title of it is right there, so you can see it. That's the very last one. So here are some resources for continued learning, and we will share the PowerPoint as well, so people can get that. The other thing that I keep saying, and it's probably moving towards the grants as well, is that how do we help people change language? We just do it. So I know that in here it says how you talk about the juvenile delinquency and talk about youth justice. You, in spaces where people are saying juvenile delinquency, you just change it. So you just keep saying it over and over again, and you might at one point say, this is why I say it, and then you use the language consistently. I know that when I talk about young people, I always say young people instead of kids. No matter if people are saying kids or not, I explain it in some spaces, but I'm always going to offer that language. Another one that I feel like has really started movement is when there was a very long time where at-risk youth was written on everything. If you wanted to help young people, you had to say at-risk youth. And there's been a lot of places that started using at-promise, who just said young people who experience a multitude of trauma. There's just a lot of different ways people have said it, and they will reference, I know that some people use at-risk youth. I use this term or this phrase because it makes more sense to me for the people we have the privilege of serving. And so how do you just say what people are saying and then offer different language and continue to use the different language that you use as a way to, consistently make a change. Some people are going to start using the language you use too. And it's going to catch on, just like the language that's not positive and is not inclusive has caught on as well. So we are at time. We want to just thank you again so much for joining us. We will share the webinar or share the PowerPoint with people. We'll send out a couple of things. So an evaluation will be sent out. In the chat box, we'll offer an evaluation in just moments. Also, an email will come to you, I would say tomorrow, that includes an evaluation. If you could please fill that out for us, that would be awesome, as well as some slides that will probably be helpful as you move forward. We also can include the article that we've shared in a number of different spaces for a resource, and so we can give you all of those things tomorrow in an email. So look for an email. It'll probably also come through the Eventbrite because it'll be a follow-up. So if we got stuck in your spam somewhere, let us back in. So we'll come to the Eventbrite to make sure everybody was here, gets that information. And then also, if you look for us in a couple of weeks, and we can send you one more email. Everything that we've done over these last few months, over the summer, will be posted on Stop Hate's website. So thank you again so much to Stop Hate. Thank you to Public Allies. Thank you to all of you. I hope you have some great discussions in your room. We really appreciate it and hope you have an amazing day and week. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicatris.
So that's it. It is my sincerest hope that this tool has been useful to you. I know that it was a little different than some webinars have been presented, but we just wanted to make sure that you watching without being able to interact with us via chat box or without being able to have us directly respond to one of your questions was as useful as possible. Again, if you have anything else you would like to hear about, more questions, or if you want us to come to you and talk about this a little bit deeper, reach out to us. You can find us on all social media programs and platforms and at Ubuntu Research, or you can email us at learn@ubunturesearch.com. We really hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.